He was asleep when his own brother killed him. On Halloween morning, 14-year-old Harley Starling was found dead in his bed, his eyes open, his head crushed, and no one in the house heard a thing. His older brother, Nicholas, sat silent, showing no emotion, until one chilling sentence changed everything. Why would a brother do this without a single sign of remorse? The boy's eyes were open. His body lay rigid, face up in bed, partially covered by a blanket pulled not by instinct, but by deliberate hands. Blood had seeped through the pillow beneath his head, now dried into a dark brown halo that stained the fabric. The skull had collapsed inwards on the right side, bone crushed, tissue exposed. There were no defensive wounds, no overturned furniture, no signs of a struggle, just silence, and a corpse staring blankly at the ceiling. At 5:30 a.m., inside a single-story home in Springfield, Ohio, the grandmother had forced the bedroom door open after receiving no response. What she found was not a child asleep, but a body long since lifeless. The temperature of the skin, the discoloration of the fingertips, the faint scent of iron in the air, all pointed to a time of death several hours prior. The killer had not run, had not screamed, had not cried. The room remained disturbingly undisturbed, except for one detail. The window was left open, not shattered, not jimmied, just quietly ajar, enough to suggest escape, or more likely a stage piece in a premeditated scene. There were no footprints outside, no tool marks on the sill, no evidence of entry or exit. It was a constructed ambiguity. The timeline begins to fracture here. Inside the house were 4 people. Harley Starling, age 14, now deceased. His 16-year-old brother, Nicholas Starling. Their grandmother, Yona Napoleon, and her live-in boyfriend, Victorino. None of them, according to initial interviews, had heard a sound during the night. This claim demands closer inspection. The type of injury inflicted, a blunt force trauma to the cranium followed by post-mortem stabbing, requires both physical proximity and psychological resolve. This was not a spontaneous act of panic. The position of the body, the covering of the face, and the absence of chaotic aftermath suggest familiarity. In familial homicides, especially between siblings, perpetrators often exhibit behaviors that point to a complex emotional relationship with the victim. Covering the face post-mortem can indicate guilt, remorse, or an unwillingness to confront the finality of the act. Blood patterns around the wound were minimal, likely due to the nature of the first impact and the victim's immediate loss of consciousness. Forensics would later confirm that the victim had been asleep when struck. The injuries were consistent with at least 2 separate instruments, a baseball bat and a knife, used sequentially. The first to incapacitate, the second to finalize. This progression is not typical in adolescent impulsive crimes. It reflects a level of decision-making, an escalation pattern, and a detachment from the emotional weight of killing. For someone under 18, this behavioral profile is rare, but not unprecedented. It often signals a blend of unresolved emotional tension, developmental disruption, and cognitive rigidity. In the moments following discovery, one individual showed an unusual lack of curiosity about the death. While the adults displayed confusion and distress, Nicholas, Harley's older brother, remained quiet, withdrawn. Not once did he ask what had happened. Instead, he commented on the open window, drawing early attention to a possible external threat. In behavioral analysis, premature suggestion of a third-party assailant by someone inside the crime scene often signals internal guilt or an attempt to deflect suspicion through narrative control. He appeared emotionally disengaged, but physically composed. His behavior was not that of someone in shock. It was calculated restraint. At this point in the investigation, one question began to emerge beneath the surface of forensic data, and interview transcripts. If the killer had stayed in the house after the act, had returned to bed, showered, and continued with the morning routine, what psychological mechanism allowed for such composure? 4 people slept under the same roof. 1 was murdered. None claimed to hear a sound. In the early stages of the investigation, the most consistent detail across all witness accounts was silence. The grandmother reported a quiet night. Her partner said the same. Both adults claimed no disturbances, no raised voices, no footsteps, no thuds. Nicholas, the brother, echoed the same narrative, repeating that nothing unusual happened during the night. The house, according to every inhabitant, remained undisturbed. But homicide rarely exists in total silence, especially not a blunt force killing with multiple injuries, followed by a stabbing. The likelihood of such an act occurring without any sound, any motion, or any residual disruption is statistically and behaviorally improbable. The family lived in a modest, single-story home. Rooms were adjacent. Walls were thin. The victim's room shared a wall with his brother's. The bathroom was centrally located. No sound barrier would have prevented the noise generated by a sudden violent assault. The absence of audible indicators suggests not that nothing happened, but that someone may have chosen not to react to what they heard. Nicholas's interview revealed significant behavioral inconsistencies. He described his evening in excessive detail, including how he let the dogs out, the number of times he used the bathroom, and even the type of video game he played. None of these details were relevant to the crime. Over-clarification is a known verbal strategy, often used unconsciously, to fill space, distract the interviewer, and control the flow of questions. It creates the illusion of cooperation without substance. His affect remained flat. No visible distress, no questions about his brother's condition, no expressions of shock, fear, or anger. When asked about discovering the locked door, he responded with logistical facts, not emotional reactions. His language remained literal and detached. For example, when asked why he didn't try to open the door or call for help earlier, he merely stated that it was locked, and he waited for his grandmother to retrieve the key. This lack of initiative stands out. In domestic crime scenes involving minors, siblings often show heightened distress, especially when confronted with the sudden inaccessibility of a shared bedroom. Panic, banging on the door, shouting, or immediate efforts to alert an adult are common. None of these were observed in Nicholas's behavior. Further contradictions emerged in his comments about the window. He was the first to mention that it had been left open. That statement was unsolicited. When questioned further, he speculated that maybe someone entered through it. Introducing the idea of an intruder before being asked directly is a known red flag. It may indicate a pre-constructed narrative designed to shift suspicion away from the household. The suggestion served no practical purpose and lacked any supporting evidence, but it strategically planted doubt. Nicholas's physical demeanor during questioning reinforced the growing behavioral profile. He sat rigid, hands interlocked beneath the table. His body remained mostly still, except when asked direct questions about the murder. Then, subtle, self-soothing gestures appeared, rubbing his palms, adjusting his legs, blinking more rapidly. These are signs of internal tension, often surfacing when cognitive dissonance between truth and fabrication becomes harder to manage. The detectives refrained from confronting him aggressively. His age, coupled with his flat tone and slow processing speed, suggested potential developmental delays. Still, those factors alone do not explain the absence of natural emotional response. Children with developmental differences can still exhibit empathy, fear, or guilt. The complete absence of such reactions from Nicholas pointed toward a deeper detachment, either psychological or intentional. Despite his monotone speech, the content of his answers grew increasingly fragmented. He failed to remember key time frames. He avoided using Harley's name. He shifted the topic to inconsequential observations about the house or family pets. These tactics, though subtle, can be mechanisms for emotional avoidance or deliberate misdirection. One particular moment stood out. When left alone briefly in the interview room, Nicholas did not pace, cry, or display any visible anxiety. He sat still, staring at the table. His face remained blank. While this behavior alone cannot confirm guilt, its context within the timeline of events made it difficult to overlook. The primary question at this stage was no longer whether Nicholas knew more than he claimed. That had become clear. The issue now was determining whether his silence was born from fear, confusion, or the calculated management of a narrative he had already rehearsed. That distinction would become central in the next phase of the interrogation. The interrogation room remained quiet. Nicholas sat with his hands folded under the table, fingers loosely interlaced. His posture was slouched but motionless, his eyes scanning slowly from corner to corner of the room without making direct contact. This physical stillness, maintained over long periods, was not the result of fear or exhaustion. It was calculated withdrawal. When asked to recall his version of the events, Nicholas responded with a flat, deliberate tone. There were no fillers, no conversational pauses, no signs of emotional distress. His responses were clipped, but not hostile. Each answer avoided commitment. He used phrases like, "I think," "maybe," and "I don't remember," with increasing frequency. These verbal evasions, especially when repeated during factual questioning, are consistent with deliberate ambiguity, not cognitive confusion. During the first half of the session, he denied any involvement in his brother's death. He focused instead on procedural details: when he woke up, how long he stayed in the bathroom, how many times the cat tried to get into his room. These details were not spontaneous. They were rehearsed fragments, designed to fill conversational space without addressing the core issue. The intent was to appear cooperative without providing substance. Detectives gradually increased the psychological pressure, introducing inconsistencies from previous witness statements and physical evidence from the crime scene. Nicholas's physical behavior changed slightly. He rubbed his palms against his knees. He adjusted the cuff of his sleeve. These repetitive gestures were not fidgeting, but self-regulation, an unconscious effort to manage internal stress without outward expression. As the questioning became more direct, a pattern emerged. Whenever asked specifically about Harley, Nicholas's tone shifted. He spoke more quickly, occasionally overlapping his own words. His voice pitched higher by a small margin, then returned to monotone. His gaze drifted left, consistent with internal recall, but never upward, never expressive. He referred to his brother not by name, but by pronoun. He, him. This distancing technique, used consistently, suggested emotional separation from the victim. When investigators introduced the physical evidence, jeans with bloodstains found near the laundry, a baseball bat recovered from outside, surveillance footage showing his movements, Nicholas paused for longer intervals before speaking. He asked for the evidence to be repeated, then responded with non-answers. This delay was strategic. It provided time for recalibration, not confusion. Eventually, the shift occurred. After repeated insistence that he was just angry and didn't know what happened, Nicholas gave a quiet but direct response. "I hit him." His voice did not tremble. His posture remained fixed. There was no visible remorse, no emotional breakdown. He detailed the act in neutral terms, first the bat, then the knife. He admitted Harley had been asleep. He acknowledged the door was locked from inside after the act. He confirmed he had opened the window to make it look like someone else had come in. This confession was devoid of emotional language. He did not say he was sorry. He did not express regret. He did not attempt to justify the act as self-defense or provocation. The explanation was mechanical. "He made me mad. This simplicity was misleading. The use of two separate weapons, the decision to clean himself afterward, the strategic placement of evidence, all indicated a higher-order thought process. This was not an impulsive outburst. It was structured escalation. Throughout the confession, Nicholas maintained eye contact more consistently, but not in the way most people do when expressing honesty. His gaze did not search for connection. It searched for response. He was scanning the investigators for signs of acceptance, signs that his story fit their expectations. This behavior aligns with manipulative patterning, often seen in subjects who lack emotional reciprocity but crave control over narrative. After the confession, Nicholas asked only one question: "What will happen to me now?" He did not ask about his brother, his grandmother, or the consequences of the act on others. His focus remained centered on the immediate impact to himself. This behavioral profile, marked by emotional detachment, narrative management, and affective neutrality, is atypical for juvenile offenders with no prior history of violence. It suggests a longer trajectory of internal conflict, potentially compounded by developmental gaps and unresolved familial tension. The exact origin of that internal pressure remained unclear. Whether it stemmed from suppressed resentment, perceived injustice, or pathological emotional disconnection would require deeper clinical evaluation. But one thing was evident. By the time Nicholas entered his brother's room that night, the act had already been decided. The confession lacked complexity, but the motive behind it did not. Nicholas Starling's explanation, "He made me mad," was superficially straightforward. It provided no detail, no context, and no emotional reasoning. Yet the sequence of his actions, the method of the crime, and the emotional detachment surrounding the aftermath pointed to a deeper, more sustained psychological fracture. In the months leading up to the homicide, Nicholas had exhibited behaviors consistent with progressive emotional withdrawal. He was socially isolated at school, maintained few friendships, and often preferred solitary activities. Family members later recalled his increasing resistance to shared routines, refusal to participate in group meals, and long periods of silence. These were not explosive outbursts or dramatic episodes. They were patterns of detachment, gradual but persistent. Reports from the household confirmed that Harley, though younger, was more socially adaptable. He had recently begun making friends, becoming more active outside the home. He reportedly had a brighter demeanor, stronger verbal skills, and a closer relationship with their grandmother. These contrasts, when placed alongside Nicholas's psychological profile, suggest a developing perception of inequality, one where the younger sibling was seen as favored, more accepted, or emotionally dominant. This perception, whether accurate or distorted by Nicholas's internal state, can become a breeding ground for resentment in adolescent offenders, especially in environments lacking emotional communication. Such beliefs can calcify into chronic grievances. In such cases, even small conflicts, arguments over household chores, video games, or in this case Halloween candy, can serve as the final trigger, not the cause, but the opportunity. Evidence of this internal buildup emerged through minor incidents before the crime. Nicholas had displayed aggression toward the family's cat, tying string around its neck and reacting emotionally when challenged about it. He had also punched a wall in frustration, leaving a hole later referenced during his interrogation. These are markers of displaced anger, acts of frustration directed at objects or animals instead of people. While not criminal in themselves, they often serve as warning signs when part of a behavioral escalation. After the murder, Nicholas displayed behavior that further highlighted his detachment. He cleaned himself, returned to bed, and resumed his morning routine without interruption. There was no attempt to flee, no call for help, no emotional outburst. His only concern appeared when detectives mentioned evidence found in the house. Even then, his responses were pragmatic, not fearful. This lack of post-crime anxiety is not consistent with panic or accidental violence. It reflects either a significant emotional deficiency or a cognitive disassociation from the act itself. In younger offenders, this kind of dissociation can stem from prolonged internalization of helplessness. Over time, they begin to perceive violence as a means of reclaiming control, especially in environments where they feel overlooked or emotionally silenced. Nicholas's reference to the window, opened intentionally to suggest intrusion, confirms a basic level of planning. While not sophisticated, this detail demonstrates forethought. The staging of the scene, though unconvincing to professionals, was an attempt to redirect suspicion. This behavior aligns with the profile of an adolescent offender who understands consequence, but lacks the emotional maturity to process moral weight. Despite the severity of the act, Nicholas never articulated remorse. He did not inquire about his brother's final moments, did not ask whether the family was okay, and showed no signs of emotional collapse even after viewing photographic evidence of the crime. These omissions, combined with his consistent avoidance of direct emotional language, support the hypothesis of an effective blunting, whether due to developmental delay, trauma, or early-onset personality disturbance, remains uncertain. The full trajectory of Nicholas's behavior, from emotional withdrawal to quiet resentment to carefully staged violence, suggests not a momentary lapse, but a slow-building psychological process. It likely began with feelings of inferiority or rejection, evolved through isolation, and culminated in a singular act of irreversible harm. What remains unclear is whether earlier intervention, through counseling, behavioral assessments, or structured social support, could have disrupted that trajectory before it reached its end. The courtroom remained still as the charges were read aloud: aggravated murder and tampering with evidence. Nicholas Starling stood silently between his attorneys, expressionless. He did not glance toward the gallery where his grandmother sat. He did not react to the repeated mention of his brother's name. The silence that followed his arrest continued through the trial process, broken only by procedural dialogue and his eventual change of plea. Initially, a not guilty plea by reason of insanity was entered. Psychological evaluations were ordered to determine competency and mental state at the time of the offense. The findings did not indicate any active psychosis or severe cognitive impairment. He was deemed fit to stand trial. Although developmental concerns were noted, they were not considered significant enough to render him incapable of understanding the proceedings or the wrongfulness of his actions. The decision to transfer the case to adult court was based on several factors: the brutality of the crime, the calculated staging of the scene, and the absence of genuine remorse. Prosecutors argued that the crime was not the result of impulsivity, but a deliberate act requiring planning, control, and emotional detachment. The defense attempted to emphasize Nicholas's age and history of trauma, but the mitigating factors were outweighed by the nature of the offense. Ultimately, Nicholas changed his plea to guilty. He was sentenced to 15 years to life in prison, with the possibility of parole beginning in 2031. He was transferred to a state correctional facility, placed in protective custody due to his age and the nature of his crime. Early reports from his incarceration indicated that he remained compliant but withdrawn, participating minimally in structured programs and maintaining low levels of interaction with staff and other inmates. The psychological aftermath within the surviving family was significant. The grandmother, who had raised both boys following the death of their father, expressed conflicting emotions: grief, confusion, guilt. Publicly, she continued to refer to Nicholas as her grandson, acknowledging the pain he caused while refusing to disown him. This emotional ambivalence is common among caregivers in intrafamilial homicide cases. It reflects the impossibility of separating love from betrayal, kinship from horror. The wider community reacted with shock. Local schools and youth programs cited the case in renewed discussions about early behavioral intervention. Teachers and counselors questioned whether signs had been missed, whether behavioral red flags had been dismissed as adolescent moodiness or social awkwardness. The case challenged assumptions about what a young offender looks like. Nicholas had no juvenile record, no history of violent incidents, yet he had committed one of the most extreme acts possible. For professionals in forensic psychology, the Starling case reinforced a familiar yet uncomfortable truth. Emotional suppression in youth can manifest in ways that are quiet, hidden, and ultimately catastrophic. Nicholas did not explode outwardly. He did not exhibit overt aggression toward others. His violence gestated in silence, fueled by years of emotional disconnection and unspoken resentment. The most striking element of this case was not the method of the murder, but the emotional vacuum surrounding it. No grief at discovery, no panic after the act, no sorrow during confession. Whether this was the result of trauma, developmental disruption, or inherent personality disturbance remains an open question. What is certain is that the absence of empathy, combined with a failure to intervene in early warning signs, created a convergence that led to irreversible tragedy. In the end, the Harley Starling case stands as a reminder that the roots of violence often grow in isolation. Prevention does not begin with prison sentences or courtrooms. It begins in bedrooms, classrooms, and dinner tables, places where emotional neglect, when left unaddressed, can eventually turn inward and then outward, with devastating results.